Hello, my name's Aviva, and today I wanted to share with you how to read the Throne of Glass series. So I've actually made this video on my channel before. It's actually one of the first videos that I ever made when I started my channel, but I just finished rereading the entire series for the third time around, and I had some updates that I wanted to share with you. So I've decided that we're going to remake this entire video. So if you're not familiar with what the Throne of Glass series is, it's basically a high fantasy series that has a lot of romances in it, and therefore it is very, very popular because it's just got a jumble of stuff that a lot of people are really big fans of, including myself. It's one of my favorite series of all time, and therefore it is an extremely popular series. So in this series, you're basically following this girl named Selena, who is a very well-trained assassin. And at the beginning of Throne of Glass, she basically gets invited to go to the King of Rifthold and compete to become his champion. And if she wins, she's going to be his personal assassin. So that's kind of like the gist of the first book in this series. And then obviously it's an 8-book series, so things are going to pile up on each other. You're going to meet more characters as the books go on, and then it's eventually going to turn into a war story. So, I mean, I can't really tell you much more than that because I don't want to give away any spoilers in this video, but that is basically the gist of it. It's a high fantasy series. You're also going to be following a lot of romances, so it's got a great world building. It's got an amazing magic system. It's got amazing characters for you to follow. It's got amazing romances for you to follow. There are humans, there are witches, there are fae. There is so much going on in this series, and it is one of my favorites of all time. I could probably reread this series forever and never get bored. So if you have never read this series and you are very intrigued, I really do highly recommend you check it out. And if you are going to check it out, there actually are a couple of ways that you can go about reading it. So you can obviously start with the very easy way that a lot of people recommend, which is publication order. So that actually starts with Assassin's Blade, then you move to Throne of Glass, then Crown of Midnight, then Heir of Fire, then Queen of Shadows, then Empire of Storms, then Tower of Dawn, and then Kingdom of Ash. So the thing is, a lot of people get confused because Assassin's Blade is technically a prequel. In that book, you're following 5 different short stories about Selena Sarzothian and the adventures that she went on and how she became the assassin that she is today. And it kind of explains how she got where she is at the beginning of the Throne of Glass story. So people kind of get confused as to like, what is that book actually about? And like, are you supposed to start with it or not? So there's also one more thing about reading it in publication order that you might not be aware of. And that is that Tower of Dawn and Empire of Storm actually happened at the exact same time. Because in this series, you're following multiple characters. At the end of Queen of Shadows, something happens that makes a couple of the characters like split off. And therefore Tower of Dawn and Empire of Storms happen at the exact same time, just on different parts of the continent. So technically you can read them in any order that you want because they're just 2 different things happening at the same time, and you don't really get spoiled for anything by reading one before the other or any which way you want to go about it, you know? So with that said, I actually personally enjoy reading this series a little bit out of order from the publication order, and that is for me to start with Throne of Glass, then read Crown of Midnight, then Heir of Fire, then stick in Assassin's Blade, then read Queen of Shadows, then read Tower of Dawn, then Empire of Storms, and then Kingdom of Ash. And I will explain to you why. So first up, I personally think that by jumping into an 8-book series, you really got to get yourself committed. And I think that you will better enjoy and get a sense of what the series is actually about by jumping into the story with Throne of Glass, because that is the beginning of the story. You're kind of going to get a feel of what the story is, where it's going, how it's going to feel to read it, and you'll get a better sense of if you actually want to commit to the 8 books or not. And even though Assassin's Blade is one of my favorites, I do think that you will have a better appreciation for it and the story that it's actually giving you if you do read it after Heir of Fire, because at the end of Heir of Fire, you kind of get this realization about Selena as a character, and it kind of like, it pauses there. It doesn't necessarily leave on like a massive cliffhanger where you're dying to get to Queen of Shadows, you know, like it kind of pauses for a second. And I think that it is a great time to like back up and reflect and kind of get to understand Selena a little bit more and why she is the way she is. And then you jump into Queen of Shadows, and then all of a sudden, everything that was talked about in Assassin's Blade is directly talked about again in Queen of Shadows. Like in Assassin's Blade specifically, you get to meet a lot of characters that were a part of Selena's life before the beginning of Throne of Glass. And then when you get into Queen of Shadows, all of a sudden, all of those characters show up again and things start to get like referred to. And I just think that this is a very large series and it's going to take you a long time to get through it. And therefore, having Assassin's Blade very fresh in your mind going into Queen of Shadows will make you enjoy Queen of Shadows a little bit more. So I just think like out of all the spots to read the prequel 5 short stories, I think that between Airfire and Queen of Shadows is the best spot to read in it. This is my personal opinion, and any way that you go about reading this series is a totally okay way to go about it. I'm just giving you a couple of options in case you didn't necessarily want to read it in publication order and you're curious as to why there are multiple ways that people say you can go about reading this series. So with that said, I also personally enjoy swapping around Tower of Dawn and Empire of Storms because, like I said, both of those books take place at the exact same time. You technically could read them in any order, and I feel this way for a couple of reasons. So happens to be Tower of Dawn, it's kind of a side story about chaos. So something happens at the end of Queen of Shadows that basically makes that character go to another continent and go do his own thing for a little bit. So I happen to think that, like, if anything, Queen of Shadows ends off on more of a cliffhanger for that character specifically than it does for the rest of the crew that you're going to be following in Empire of Storms. And happens to be Empire of Storms ends off on a massive, massive cliffhanger. And you are just going to want to jump into Kingdom of Ash right after that. You are going to want to know what's going to happen. And therefore, having to put like a side story about Chaol in between Empire of Storms and Kingdom of Ash is really going to like ruin the momentum that you're going for. Like if you wanted to just like, you know, go ahead and finish this series. So I think, you know, you end Queen of Shadows, you kind of get off on this cliffhanger of like, well, what's going to happen with Chaol now? And therefore you jump into his book with Tower of Dawn. You kind of, you know, get his entire story out of the way. And then you jump back to the rest of the crew that we're following and you continue on with their story. And then you get to the end of Empire of Storms, you get through the cliffhanger, and then you get to just jump straight into the ending. So that is kind of why I feel about that. Like there's a couple of more reasons why I feel this way, but that is the gist of it. Like I personally think like read Tower of Dawn first because you're not going to want to sit through the entire thing before, you know, you get to the ending. It's just, it's going to ruin the momentum a little bit. But happens to be my third way that I think that you could read this series is the way that I thought about reading it this third time around that I reread this series. And that is actually to tandem read Tower of Dawn and Empire of Storms. So there is somewhere online, I'm not really sure where, but you can easily Google it and you can find out how to read like chapter by chapter where technically absolutely nothing will be spoiled for you, because technically in Tower of Dawn, you kind of get like some messengers come back from like, you know, the other place, like the place that like Empire of Storms is taking place. And they kind of bring some information about like, oh, well, we just heard that some of these characters had just did this and just did that. But it's all like, you know, it's just messengers. It's not necessarily like, you know, a spoiler or anything where it's like, you really can't read Tower of Dawn first. But technically there are breaking points where it basically tells you like where things are taking place in the timeline. And therefore there are people online who have basically tandemed up Tower of Dawn and Empire of Storms. So you could kind of read it as one book. So it's like you go a couple of chapters in Tower of Dawn, then you jump to Empire of Storms, then you jump back to Tower of Dawn, and it kind of goes like that. And I think that that actually might be the best way to read it. I haven't done it yet, but I feel like the next time that I reread this series, I might go about reading it that way, because I just think that like in this series, you're already following so many characters and all the stories are not necessarily taking place like in the same spot. Like you're following multiple people over like, you know, an entire continent and like different things are happening. So what's the big deal to just like throw in one more, you know, point of view and follow another character that happens to be taking place, you know, on another continent. So that is kind of like, you know, my thoughts on that specifically. But I mean, I think that is about it. Like you could either read it, you know, publication order, or you can put Assassin's Blade in between in between Airfire and Queen of Shadows. And you can also swap around Tower of Dawn or read it tandemly. So, you know, that is all of the different options that you have for reading this series. I don't think there is anything else to share with you about that, like other ways you can go about it. Those are all the ways that I personally recommend. I think any way you go about reading this series is an okay time. But if you were going to ask my personal opinion, I think the best way is to read Assassin's Blade after Airfire and then tandem read Tower of Dawn and Empire of Storms, or read Tower of Dawn first. I don't think that you will regret that decision. So anyway, I hope that this video was helpful. I hope that you got a better understanding of what this series is about and how you can go about reading it. If you have any more questions, then feel free to leave a comment down below and I will try to answer them for you. And if you enjoyed watching this video, if you found it helpful, please give it a thumbs up. Subscribe if you're not subscribed to my channel yet. And with that said, thank you so much for watching, and until next time, enjoy reading.